everybody. I'm Brett Dietz, and I am the Director of Percussion Studies and Professor of Percussion at Louisiana State University. And I am very fortunate because I am in the home of one of my former teachers, a man who needs no introduction in the world of percussion, Mr. Stanley Leonard. And Stanley has had a tremendous career as a timpanist with the Pittsburgh Symphony. He was the Pittsburgh Symphony timpanist for over 38 years. And he's also a well-known composer and a wonderful educator. He has been inducted into the Percussive Art Society Hall of Fame. And he also taught at Carnegie Mellon University and Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I was fortunate enough to study with him. So here we are in Naples, Florida, in Stan Leonard's studio. So welcome to the interview, Stan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, Brett. It's a real pleasure and lovely opportunity for us to have a nice conversation.
Yeah.
So
good. So we're going to start right at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a long way back.
It is a long way back, but you've had, we were just calculating this right before we started filming. You've been doing in the music industry for 75 years now, over 75 years, coming up on 76. So let's start all the way back when you were a child. And when did you become interested in music, and when did you decide to pursue it as a career?
Well, I came from a very musical family. My father was a singer, my mother was a pianist, and so from the time I was practically born, music was in our household. So it was a normal part of my life, and I can recall one story my mother told me of when I was pretty small child. I mean, like 1 or 2 years old. There was a high school band that used to practice marching up and down the street in front of our house where we lived in Philadelphia. And she said she would put me up to the window to hear, and we'll take a look at that band. And she said my body would just get tense like that. So I that's probably when it started.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. But anyway, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my mother and father would take us down to the Academy of Music in Philadelphia to hear the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I got my first earful of orchestral sound with a very good band, and so I was always interested in the sound of music. And I think probably the sound of an orchestra didn't start really charging me up until I was a little older and I understood what it was all about. Mm-hmm. But the music has always been part of my life.
When did you decide to take it seriously?
Well, we lived in Philadelphia and then moved to Independence, Missouri. For my parents had a goal that they needed to meet that way. So I started, I really wanted to play the snare drum. For some reason or other, I had really become fascinated with that sound. So they bought me this drum that was half toy and half real. Mm-hmm. And of course, being musicians, my folks said, well, you got to learn how to play that, and we don't know how to teach you. So they looked around in the local tiny little area where we lived. Independence, Missouri was a country town of 17,000 people in those days. And they found a music store. It was run by a guy who played the tuba, but he also taught all the instruments. Okay. So they signed me up with his name is Turner. And they signed me up with him, and he showed me how to hold the sticks and play a few things. And I can't remember exactly. I could already read music because my mother started my brother and I on piano when we were 4 years old.
Okay.
So I knew about rhythms and how to read music. So one time after I'd taken a few lessons, I guess he saw some possibilities. He said, "I have this little band. Would you like to come up and when I have a rehearsal and play in this little band?" And he said, "Here's a drum part to some march, a famous march." And that was a little bit beyond me. But I went to the rehearsal. Mm-hmm. But after we started, I took my little toy drum on a stand. And after we started playing, I think that must have been when I was like maybe in the 6th grade or something like that. And so I'm looking at my band part and listening to what's going on, and I've finally decided I don't know where the heck I am in this music. But so I just played it. I listened to the music and I faked a drum part.
Right.
And then later on, when I was in junior high school then, which would have been about a year or so later, I was fortunate to have in the third hour band. I even remember the hour. The director played violin in the Kansas City Philharmonic.
Okay.
And after he got to know all the students and listened to us play in this band, he must have decided, well, maybe I should continue this with a little more seriousness. Mm-hmm. And so he suggested I study with Vera McNary, who was the principal of the Kansas City Philharmonic. Okay. So it's interesting how you meet these people along the line, and they're little stepping stones in your life. Well, this guy was really important because then I started studying with Vera, and then I really found out, what playing music and on a drum was really all about.
Right.
And so that's really how it kind of all started that way.
And when did you decide? I would assume in high school at one point you decided to take this up as a career choice.
Well, it was actually after I discovered the timpani.
Okay.
I sort of knew what the kettle drums were, the timpani, but I felt confident playing the snare drum. I went to audition for the Independence Little Symphony, as it was called. The director was a good friend of my folks because they were in music there. Okay. And so I remember I played the snare drum part in the introduction of Emperor Waltz.
Okay.
Strauss, Emperor Waltz. Dum, dum, ba-dum, bum, bum. So I played that for him, and he looked at me and he said, "You know what the timpani are?" And I said, "Well, I know what they're like." He said, "Well, come with me." And so he took me downstairs and from his office, and he showed me this ancient pair of kettle drums that were made in Belgium at the turn of the 20th century. And he showed me how to hold the sticks and where to hit the drum. And he said, "Come to next week's rehearsal." Well, I was floored. I didn't know what to do. So I immediately convinced my folks that I needed to go to the Jenkins Music Company. This is when I was about 14 years old. So I would have been from the 6th grade to the 9th grade. And I told my folks, I need to find out how to play the timpani. I'm supposed to go to next week's rehearsal. So I got on the bus and I rode to Kansas City and went to Jenkins Music Store and I found the Ludwig Timpani Instructor, a book.
Okay, right.
So I brought that home, did a lot of reading. I tried playing some of the stuff that was in there, and I went to the rehearsal, and the first thing they put up in front of me was the Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, which I of course had to tune the drums. And so I can remember this, really, for some reason I remember this vividly. I had a pitch pipe, so I could tune. But I for some reason or other, I didn't use the pitch pipe in this rehearsal, and I leaned over to the fourth horn player, and I said, "Could you play a B for me?" And he said, "In C or in F?" And I didn't know what the heck he was talking about.
Right.
So I said, "Just so I could play the B that's in my part." Mm-hmm. So he played a B. Right. Maybe I forgot to take my tuning fork or my pipe.
Right.
So anyway, that's how all that stuff started. And after I got playing that way, so now I was playing the snare drum and now I'm playing the timpani. I thought, man, this is something that I'd really like to do. I think I'd like to be a professional orchestral performer. Oh. So I kind of decided pretty early.
Okay.
And it went uphill, as they say, from there.
Now, were you playing with Kansas City before college?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so.
But yeah, I was invited by my teachers,
right.
Who by that, and then later on in my last 2 years of high school, then I started studying with the timpanist. Okay. It was Ben Udell. His real name was Benjamin Udelowitz. Okay. But he changed it to Udell. Right. And he was a great guy. I love that guy. And he taught me so much about music as well as playing the kettle drums. Okay. So when I was in high school, they always hired extra people and stuff. So Vera talked to me, and she said, you know, you want to come play with us?
Mm.
And I said, sure.
Yeah.
We're going to turn down an offer like that.
Right.
So that's when I was like 17 years old. Then I was a senior in high school.
Okay. Did you I remember you telling me one time you went and you played with one of the Musser orchestras?
Yes.
Okay.
And, yeah, that was in 1948.
Okay.
That was the summer of 1948. That's before I actually started playing with the Philharmonic.
Okay.
That fall. And yeah, Vera was a Musser student.
Okay.
She was, and when he finally was on his way out of this life, she accumulated all of his Mellon instruments, or most of them.
Wow.
And she also was his nursemaid, she told me.
Oh, wow.
When he was very sick out in California, in Los Angeles. Then I went to Chicago all by myself with that marimba that she eventually gave me. And it was packed up in a couple of different cases. My folks put me in a marimbas on a train from Independence.
That's amazing.
Maybe we went to Kansas City for that one. And I got off in Chicago, took a cab with first I thought I went to the baggage place, I remember, and they couldn't find my marimba. But eventually they did.
Okay, good.
So, because it didn't belong to me then.
Right.
So eventually put all that junk in a cab and took me to the hotel. I thought I was really in big time, boy.
Yeah.
So we played, we got together, and there was at least 100 of us.
Okay.
And I became very anonymous, and we were in Soldiers Field, and this was an annual event at that time.
Okay.
So I have some pictures. I actually have some old videos of the summer when I played.
Okay. All right.
But you can't tell. It's so blurred you can't tell whether it's where I am.
And you said Musser conducted, right?
Musser conducted. He had a big long baton that was lit.
Okay.
Because we played at night.
All right.
And you had to be able to see this. So we were all up in this one bleacher section at the end of Soldiers Field.
Okay.
And he was this little figure down there with a lighted baton conducting us. I don't know, there was a whole repertoire, Pilgrim's Chorus, all the old-time Musser pieces. It was quite a repertoire. I think I was playing part 3 or something like that.
Wow.
He had all of his best pupils playing part 1s and down in the front. So, but I guess since it was probably Vera's, stepping in, that gave me the opportunity to do that. I would have never even heard of it.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that was really an interesting experience.
Yeah.
So I was never that crazy about the marimba, but I knew it was important to play.
Right.
So eventually, I really started concentrating on the timpani then. After that.
So, you decided to go to college to music, and I know you eventually landed at Eastman School of Music, and were really part of the the initial wind ensemble with Frederick Pinnell, and you were also part of the marimba masters there, which is a big deal. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about you decided to go to college for music. You were already playing professionally at this point, with Kansas City. So tell us about your college experience, and then what it was like when you finally landed at Eastman and got to work with Fred Pinnell and some of the other great percussionists that you worked with there too. So go ahead.
We had a good time. Well, I went to Northwestern because I had a high school friend who had been there, because I didn't go to college right away. I stayed home and worked and played with the orchestra for a year. And but this friend said, "Oh, you have to go to Northwestern. It's a wonderful school." And I had investigated, I don't think I had investigated a Curtis Institute. In fact, I auditioned at Curtis because was my folks' home, and that's where I was born.
Right.
And so Curtis had this kind of aura.
Right.
But I didn't get in.
Okay.
Actually, I remember the audition, there was two of us, a woman, a girl, and myself. The girl went in and played, I came in, and then I went in and played. And the man who auditioned us was the timpanist of the Philadelphia Orchestra at the time, and he was only there a couple of years. And he wasn't probably a real timpanist anyway, but somehow or other, Ormady said, "I need a timpani player." That was what they used to do in those days.
Okay.
But when the girl came out, I was, that I went in and played, and after that, then the man told me, well, we've taken the girl, and she wound up to be actually a very famous klezmer drummer in Philadelphia.
Okay.
I discovered that years later.
All right.
But anyway, so I didn't get encouraged. So I went back, and then I started searching, and my friend said, well, Northwestern's great. So I applied and was accepted, and I went to school there for 1 semester, and I was terribly disappointed, unfortunately. I studied with Edward Metzinger, who was the timpanist of the Chicago Symphony. I did not learn a whole lot about timpani, but for some reason or other, he taught me a lot of new things about snare drum playing. And but the facilities at Northwestern at that time were really lousy, and I slept in a Quonset hut with other students. The music school was a big ancient Victorian home. Did not have any studios in it. That's why I had to get on the subway, or I had to get on the elevated and go from Evanston down into downtown Chicago to take a lesson with Edward Metzinger. And my first lesson was sitting on 2 boxes with a practice pad in between me with Metzinger.
Wow.
Right next to the men's room under the stage at Orchestra Hall.
That's very sexy.
That was the first nail in the coffin there. So then later on, he got this little studio somewhere that actually had two little timpani in it. So we were able to actually talk about some timpani things. So I was really disappointed. So I had a sweetheart who was at this little college in Iowa, which I was very familiar with, and so I decided, to heck with this. I'm going to just finish out this year there. So that's what I transferred from Northwestern to Graceland College. And then when I was there was a teacher there, a professor of piano, and he was a friend of my parents from Philadelphia, years, believe it or not. And he saw I had some talent and so forth, and he said, you should go to Eastman. He was getting his doctorate at Eastman at the time, so he was familiar with the school. And he said, you should go to Eastman. And I thought, well, that's kind of expensive. And we were a very modest, as I said, income family. But if I tell you how much it cost, it'll sound like nothing. It was like $300 a semester. That was really expensive in 1949, 50.
I bet you it's way more now.
Now it's $1,000 a day.
Yeah, something like that.
Anyway, so I thought, okay. So I applied, and I didn't even take an audition. What I did was I got some letters of recommendation from Vera and Ben, and also then from the conductor of the Kansas City Philharmonic, whose name was Hans Schwieger. And they all sent recommendations for me, and I was accepted. So, and that was the best thing I ever did, was to go to Eastman.
So tell us who your classmates were.
My classmates were John Beck, Gordon Peters, Mitch Peters, a man named James Dotson, who was a marimba virtuoso, and he eventually wound up playing in the San Antonio Symphony, and then ran a big music store in San Antonio. But he unfortunately died quite early. And then another person named Douglas Marsh was his name, and none of us in the following years knew whatever happened to Doug. But we know what happened to John Beck and Gordon Peters. John Beck is Mr. Beck, and then Gordon Peters was principal percussionist of the Chicago Symphony for 50 years, and Mitch Peters was in both Dallas, but his longest career was timpanist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, writing music. Mitch and I were the only ones that wrote a lot of music. John wrote a few pieces that are very popular.
The Sonata for Timpani.
That one. So we had a really good time. And Gordon is the one that organized the marimba ensemble. It was the first one in any university in the country. Just as the wind ensemble was organized by Fred Fennell, and that was the first ever wind ensemble.
So what was that like playing for Frederick Fennell?
That was wonderful.
Yeah,
it was great. He was a percussionist. He actually graduated from Eastman in like 1938 or something as a percussionist. But then the conducting bug bit him. He really was he was one of my mentors that taught me about music and listening and that sort of thing. So that was a great thing, that he was also a teacher, but he never looked down on you as a student. He looked on us in the wind ensemble as professionals.
Wow.
And he also was one of the conductors of the orchestra. We had 2 or 3 orchestras at that time at Eastman, and but most of my work was with him with the wind ensemble, and that was great. And that's when we made a bunch of the first recordings.
Right.
And
so how many? I mean, so there were not a lot of majors ever. You said you had 3 orchestras and a band.
The names I told you at the beginning, that was it.
Yeah.
And we played everything.
Yeah.
So that was the good part.
Right.
So we didn't fool around, but we had a really good time.
Okay.
With the whole thing.
Tell us about the marimba masters and how that got started.
Well, Gordon did it as a kind of a project. I don't think it wasn't official. It was an unofficial little project that he wanted to do, and so he talked to the rest of them, and we said, sure, let's try it. So he had these arrangements, Musser arrangements, and then he might have made one arrangement himself. Oh yeah, I know. It was the Stars and Stripes Forever.
Okay.
And he says, Stan, you're going to play the piccolo part. I thought, oh, okay. So he considered me my concertmeister. I was the concertmeister of the marimba ensemble.
Okay.
Gordon had a tendency to be a little pompous. But we loved the guy anyway.
Yeah.
So we started rehearsing, and up in Eastman has a big building behind it, main building called that just flew out of my mind now. The Annex. Okay. Up on the 5th floor, there was this tiny little studio with actually chicken wire around part of the walls. I never could figure that out. So it was half. There must have been something else that had been in there.
Okay. But that's
the only place we could find to put, 4 marimbas or whatever we needed. So that's where we would rehearse, and that's kind of how it started. And we played well enough, and Street listened to us play, and he said, well, maybe we should play a little recital. So that's what we did. Okay. And that's whether so we played the
and
first.
You mean William Street.
Yeah, William Street.
We haven't talked about him yet. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Well, William Street was my teacher.
That's good. Okay.
And he came and listened to it and says, okay. So we played a recital. Okay. And it was all one of those things that was completely generated by the students, and it turned out to be, very important.
Tell us a little bit about what was it like studying with William Street at Eastman.
Well, William Street was the gentleman of the percussion world. Right. He always was impeccably dressed, and he played the timpani like a gentleman. He didn't put on a show or do anything like that. Right. And something that he emphasized, which none of my teachers, including Metzinger or anybody, ever emphasized before, was drawing the sound out of the drum. Okay, right. And so I didn't play that way. I had to work at that to go like this to play. I played like that. I just banged on it. I didn't bang on it, but I never thought so seriously about the actual way of producing the sound. And so he really taught. That was one of his most important things that he taught at the very beginning of when you started studying with him. So, we didn't really discuss orchestral repertoire hardly at all. Right. I thought that was really interesting, because now there's, in conservatories especially, orchestral repertoire is so important. We kind of did that all on our own. Yeah. I have Street gave me a collection of xylophone and glockenspiel excerpts that some student years before had gathered together, and he said, "Here, practice these." Right. and that's the way I did that. And timpani, well, I was already familiar with lots of the standard repertoire. Right. But the thing he left out was Mahler and Bruckner symphonies. I never heard of, and we didn't play them in the orchestras. We played all the other standard literature. Right. And I was very familiar with all the big percussion pieces from my 2 years with the Kansas City Philharmonic. But there was never any mention about all these important timpani parts in Mahler symphonies. Right. And it wasn't until I got in the Pittsburgh Symphony that I had to do a lot of on-the-job training.
Right.
With those kind of pieces.
Well, that was one of the things that you taught me, and when I say with Andy Reamer too, and Jerry Younger, that you learn to play the instrument first.
Yeah.
And then the repertoire is okay. There's a couple things to practice, but once you know how to play the instrument, then the repertoire. Okay, you play this. This is what you do. Yeah. So that's it's very interesting. That's what I try to tell my students too.
It was sort of the way he didn't spend a lot of time going over parts with us.
Mm-hmm.
He did on a few things that I would bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't take the lead in doing that. Right. If I brought it up, then we would talk about it or something.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about you're getting out of Eastman and you're coming into the professional world. So what were your experiences once you got out of college and before you landed the job in Pittsburgh? And then if you can, get into how you got the job at Pittsburgh, that'd be good too. So
well, it's actually a very short period.
Okay.
Yeah. And like we talked about, I was already a professional musician, a percussionist, orchestral percussionist when I went to school. So, but anyway, my senior year in Rochester, Peggy and I were married then. We got married, so she helped put me through school.
Okay. And now,
but I played in the Rochester Philharmonic, so I made money at that time during my senior year. And then at the end of my senior year, we had our first son.
Okay.
So I'm finishing up school with a degree and performer certificate and a wife and a child.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot.
But there was something hanging over my head, and that was the draft.
Okay.
A lot of my classmates, like John Beck and Mitch Peters, I thought, maybe Mitch didn't in this, but John Beck enlisted in the Marine Band eventually.
Okay.
But I decided, nope, they're going to have to come and get me. So, fortunately, I was able to be deferred from being drafted to finish school.
Okay.
Even though I wasn't married or didn't have a child.
Right.
It's because the head of the draft board lived across the street from Peggy's folks.
Okay. Wow. So at the end.
In Independence, Missouri. That's the way native Missourians say Missouri.
Missouri. Right. Okay.
So anyway, I had that hanging over my head.
Right.
So after school, after Mark was born in Rochester in September of the year I graduated, we moved back to Independence to wait out the time when I had to go in the Army. Okay. And in the meantime, I played with the Kansas City Philharmonic again.
Okay.
So, but then in the following January, then I got drafted.
Okay.
And so I went away to basic training, and then advanced training. I could live off base with my family.
Okay.
So that's when we packed up everybody, moved to Pemberton, New Jersey, which is a little town out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
Right next to Fort Dix, which was this gigundous, huge Army base.
Right.
Now I took my second part of basic training there. Well, the first part was in California. When everybody was in Independence, I went out to California and did a stint out there to get my first 8 weeks of basic.
Okay.
And then we went to New Jersey, and I went in it's called a band training unit. They were trained you how to be a military musician.
Okay.
That band was full of great players.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So it was called, when I went, it was the 69th Division Band, but then it became the 19th Army Band.
Okay.
So we were living off base in a little attic apartment, which was, to us, when you're 21 years, 22 years old, it's, your main thing's being together.
Right. Right.
So, and Peggy actually went back to school a little bit and got a job teaching in one of some New Jersey, one of the schools around there. So she was very productive while I was both in school. She was teaching in Rochester and going to University of Rochester. And then in Army, she was teaching, being mother, and then going to getting some certification. She had to get certification everywhere we went.
Right, yeah, sure.
So that was part of the process.
Yeah.
So, but in the 19th Army Band, it was like having a real bad job. I didn't mind military. When I was in high school, I was second in command of the battalion of ROTC in the high school. Okay. So I was into the military a little bit. And I knew a lot about the protocols and stuff. But the band training was it was an interesting experience because of the great players that were there. A lot of them went to the Seventh Army Symphony in Europe, which I thought, oh, that'd be fun.
Right.
But they wouldn't pay for Peggy.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't high enough up in my rank, so we never did do that. And I'm glad we never did do that, actually. But as part of that responsibility, the band there had the responsibility of suddenly, towards the end of my career there in the band, being the show band for a network TV show called Soldier Parade, which was sponsored by the Department of the Army, and they brought talent from people who were in the Army from all over the country to come and be on this TV show.
Oh, okay.
And there were some famous celebrities who were in the Army at the time, and they would come and singers and perform. But they had a show band, and there was a guy named Jack Seidler who was the great drum set player, and I played all the accessories.
Okay.
I usually had just 2 timpani and maybe bells and a xylophone and a pair of cymbals.
Right.
Well, Peggy would sit home. It was all live.
Okay.
It was an hour-long show with a lady named Arlene Francis, who was the host.
Okay.
And Peggy knew that I made it because before the days of cell phones,
Right.
you never just called somebody.
Right.
She knew I made it because the show opened showing my hands holding onto a pair of cymbals like this, and I would crash the cymbals. So she knew it was me because she could see the ring on my finger.
Okay. So how long did you do that?
Oh, for at least, that was at least 3 or 4 months at the end of my Army career. Maybe longer than that.
So how long were you in the Army?
21 months.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't interested in continuing a military career. So the reason I got out was because in my second year in the Army, I found out about an opening in the Pittsburgh Symphony.
Oh, okay. So
that was through the daughter of a very famous trombone teacher at Eastman, who was a close friend of William Street, my teacher. And he said, oh, my daughter plays harp in the Pittsburgh Symphony. He said, there's an opening for timpanist. He wrote that information on a postcard and sent it to me.
Wow.
That's how all that started.
Okay.
So that, completely different than today's world.
Right.
Oh boy. So I contacted them and they said, sure.
Well, so tell us about the audition then. How did you, so you got the information on this? And
I think I must have, I don't know whether I called them up or I wrote them a letter. I wrote a lot of letters in those days.
Right.
Because I was looking for a job because I knew I was going to get out of the Army.
Right.
And they invited me to come. I remember it was in the spring of it would be in the spring of 1956, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Spring of 1956. And so Peggy and I drove there. We had a new car for the first time ever. And went to the Syria Mosque.
I remember it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where the Pittsburgh Symphony played. And I was one of two people. Can you believe that? Only 2 people for an audition for a principal timpani job in a major orchestra.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. So I played in the morning on stage and for about, a long time. Mm. In those days, it wasn't like in today's world where there are, you have 3 days of audition and you have 200 people applying for the job.
And behind a screen. You weren't behind a screen.
You're lucky if you get 10 minutes.
Right.
So I spent hours, And so they said, well, come back this afternoon. So I had to go back in the afternoon. And this time they moved the timpani to some dinky little, there was just Ludwig timpani.
Right.
Nothing fancy in those days. In a small room. And the conductor was there the whole time. It wasn't a committee. William Steinberg sat through this whole thing the whole time, both times, morning and afternoon. And, I must have spent another hour playing in there. And the guy who was the timpani player, who was being ousted from his position, he's the one that was in charge of giving me stuff to play.
Oh, no.
But that's another story, too. Anyway, so one of the pieces, there's 2 things I remember. One was Steinberg asked me, we played the beginning of the Beethoven Violin Concerto. I never heard it. I didn't ever heard it. So I, off the top of my head, said, I don't know it from memory.
Oh,
that was
slick.
I can't believe I had the smarts to say that.
Mm-hmm.
So they got me the music, and I played it. Boom, 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 boom. It's 5 timpani notes on D and a little rest, and then 5 more notes on an A.
Right.
And I had never learned that at the Eastman School of Music,
right,
which was kind of a shock.
Mm.
Anyway, so I played that, and then another thing I'd never heard of was the Bartók music for strings, percussion, and celeste.
Okay.
I knew it existed, but I didn't know it. Well, it's got this one timpani, it's like paradiddles.
Yeah.
And the guy who was running he gave me this pencil written out on manuscript paper of this part from that Bartók. And I said, well, just give me I was a really good sight reader.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, give me I don't know what I said, what the heck is this?
Right.
So I look at it, and I say, oh, yeah, I can go. I can figure.
Right.
So I played it, and the guy who was the timpani bass said, you never played this piece before? I said, I never saw this piece in my life. They couldn't believe I played it like that.
Wow.
So then they offered me the job. I signed a contract. It was $120 a week.
Wow.
But it was only for 30 weeks. No, it was only for 6 months, because hardly no orchestra had a year-round job then.
Right.
Even the New York Philharmonic, Philadelphia Orchestra, nobody had year-round employment.
Yeah.
So the thing there in Pittsburgh was, and it was not like that in New York and Philadelphia also. You could work for 6 months, and then you could sign up for unemployment for 6 months.
Right.
And since I had a family, that was really important.
Right.
So that's what I did. My first season, then I played the winter season, signed up for unemployment for the first summer. But I was fortunate that I got another little job teaching in a little college, which is another story. And I made so little money that it hardly affected my unemployment.
Right.
But they would ask me, did you go look for a job? And I said, no, I was not able to find a job.
Okay, so now you've landed the job with Pittsburgh, and you got to work with William Steinberg, and then eventually Andre Previn and Lauren Mizell when you finally retired. So can you tell us about the highlights of what was that like for all those years and working with all those wonderful musicians?
Well, it was Steinberg was one of my musical mentors, I should say, because I had to do a lot of on-the-job training with some of the music. A lot of the music I knew, but I got a different, especially Wagner. I had played a lot of Wagner pieces, but he was able to give a different slant on these things, and so I really learned a lot musically from him. And of course, just being around these people who were really supportive to me, I was really fortunate. I was 25 years old. I was the youngest person in the orchestra. Right. And here were these people who, most of whom had played considerably longer than my 25 years. Right. And some of them were maybe 4 or 5 years older than I was, but they were already more experienced. Right. And with this orchestra particularly. And every orchestra has its own personality. I was used to playing with the orchestras and the wind ensemble and reaction. I got to know the feel of that ensemble. Right. So the most important thing when I started was getting the feel of the ensemble. Where is everybody going when we're playing together? Right. And Steinberg was a little bit different in his conducting, because unlike most conductors, he wasn't particularly interested in having you go like this is the down and here's where it happens. Right. He would go. Wow. So it took a little bit of getting used to that. Right. Most of the time, what it did was it forced you to listen like crazy. Right. You had to listen like crazy. Listen and kind of breathe with what was going on. Right. And I kind of just did that automatically, because a lot of people said, well, they said, you never played with Steinberg, right? I said, no. They said, well, how do how did you accommodate? And I said, I don't know. I listen and I watch, and he tells me what I'm supposed to do, and I do it.
Right.
So that's also part of the process of playing is, performing and getting used to what the leader is trying to convey. He's trying to send this message to you.
Right.
And a really good leader does that, and you sense it. You can tell immediately when a person steps up on the podium and starts conducting. There's no message.
Right.
But there was always a message.
Right.
But it was sometimes it was. It was a little. You had a. I can remember one of the good examples. This is the beginning of the Heroica Symphony by Beethoven, which was bump, bump. So with Steinberg, it's not bump, bump. It's bump, bump. So it was like he's telling you ahead of time, this is the way it goes. Now you make it go.
Okay.
And he even said that sometimes, that he was instructing you what was coming, And in a chamber ensemble, that's what you do. You sense this stuff together. But it's a tough job with 100, 90 people.
Yeah.
But he was able to do that. So that showed his ability musically and as a musical leader too. And boy, he knew so many things from memory. I mean, we do every classical piano concerto or violin concerto you could think of. He never used a score in a concert.
Right.
It was like this was part of him, this music. So
that's impressive.
Steinberg was this master of I would say the German repertoire, and Previn was a master of the French and some Russian repertoire, and Mazel was a master of whoever he wanted to be at the moment.
Right.
He had an incredible. We were never sure whether he had photographic memory or not.
Okay.
Because when he would be conducting, sometimes he'd be looking down, and we would say, "Oh, he's looking at the score to find what page we're on."
Right.
When Mellon and Mazel first came, we had all these terrible stories about him, and he did have some weird things that he did, but you could always depend on what he was doing.
Right.
So I was very fortunate that the music directors that I had, you could always depend on them.
Right.
Some of the guest conductors were not quite the same.
Right. Right.
So I know that some music directors were sort of like that. They would change their mind at a concert.
Okay.
And do something different.
Right.
These men it was always, we knew what was needed and had to happen when it was supposed to happen.
Right. Can you tell us about the timpani parts of the Beethoven symphonies that Laura Mazel rewrote?
Yeah, he was great for adding extra notes that he thought would increase the melodic and harmonic value of the Beethoven symphonies.
Right.
And to me, after listening to some of those things, what it did was it made the timpani part disappear because it was not a slightly different. It was maybe within the harmonic picture of the what was happening.
Right.
But it was still a different note, and you could hear it like a drum.
Okay.
And you could, so the rhythm was very well accentuated.
Right.
I was a purist myself.
So you preferred the original?
I like the originals, but I have a collection of his Beethoven symphonies where all kinds of stuff. And in one, I can even remember in one movement, slow moon of one of them. I can't remember which one was. He gave me the melody. It was like bum 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 that you had to play on the timpani. And I would look. I never took my eyes off him. He was always watching everybody, but I never took my eyes off him. And so I play this, and I go, bum, 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 bum. Of course, I had to pedal a couple notes in there.
Right.
And he thought that was just so. I thought, man, he feels like he's really done something neat. And so I would smile back at him. And one of the few times when he would smile,
Okay.
I would smile afterwards, like, "Oh, this is really great." I thought it was awful. I mean, to me, it wasn't awful. But then, all these other changes that he made. I remember many years ago when they were getting a new timpani player in the New York Philharmonic, everybody wanted my Lamazelle version. I said, well, I'm not going to pass these around all over the place. So
Right.
I think I might have given them to one person who was a friend of mine or something.
Okay.
I mean,
What about some composers that you work with?
let's see. Aaron Copland.
Uh-huh.
I played with Leonard Bernstein, the Jeremiah Symphony. I know Paul Hindemith. Yeah, he wrote a piece called the Pittsburgh Symphony.
Oh, okay.
And he just happened to write a big timpani solo in one of the movements.
Oh, cool.
It was and that was the theme. Like, Pittsburgh is a great old town or something like that. He must have investigated folk songs from the past. It wasn't a very good piece, but it was a whole symphony.
Right.
And he was like a schoolmaster conductor.
Yeah.
But he was very nice to me, because after we played the first concert of the premiere, it was in Syria Mosque. He came, or finishing the concert, everybody's milling around back, bumping into each other, trying to get out of there. And here he comes running up and he says, "Where's the timpani player? Where's the timpani player?" And I thought, what did I do? And he came over to me, he grabbed my hand, he shook it, he says, "That's the way the timpani should sound."
Wow.
So that was really a neat moment.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so let's talk about when you first started to compose, and how did that change your perception of the way you approach music?
Well, I'm not sure that composing changed my perception, because I wanted my composing to have some of the musical sense that I had, and that was the struggle.
Okay, all right, good.
It was like, how do I say this musically, or how do I express this? Because I started composing little piano pieces when I was in high school,
right?
And they were all pretty awful. But I remember one I wrote. My mother had bought this recording of a Shostakovich symphony.
Okay.
I think it might have been the first symphony that has the big timpani solo in one place. But when there's one little theme in there really attracted me, and I thought, I'm going to take that and make a little piano piece and use that. So it's like something or other on the theme of Shostakovich. I thought, wow.
Right.
So I wrote this little piano piece, like a prelude or something. And so that I was always interested in trying to put my musical feelings down on a piece of paper, and then hear what it sounded like.
Right.
It wasn't easy. I mean, because one of the things that I had thought about doing was writing for. I loved the thought of writing music for films.
Right.
And I did a lot of investigating about that, but I couldn't do it fast enough.
Okay.
I couldn't look at a piece, after I wrote it, I could do it. But when I was wanting to put it down, I couldn't imagine it on a piece of paper. I had to hear it before I could put it on a piece of paper. And like people like Andre Present, they didn't need to do that. They heard it and they could put it down.
Right.
My wife can do that.
Okay.
She has perfect pitch.
Okay.
Like, she would know instantly if she's looking at a piece if it's in the wrong key.
Okay.
And she hears it.
Wow, that's impressive.
So, if I'd have had that talent, I might have been a film composer, because I was really that was just so fascinated me, to be able to write music to a drama or to action and movement.
Right.
I really enjoyed that. So we're off the subject now. Oh no.
Yeah.
So, but then when I was learning, when I was playing with the Kansas City Philharmonic when I was in high school, I started thinking, oh man, I got to find out more about how this looks like on a score.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to the Jackson County Library and check out a score and copy it all down.
Mm-hmm.
So I still have it, this little notebook with all of these big percussion scores, Ravel and Shostakovich, and anything that had a lot of percussion in it.
Right.
But then I thought, maybe I could write a little ensemble. So I didn't call them ensemble. I call them exercises for the battery.
Okay.
So I wrote little quartets and stuff.
Right.
So, but it wasn't until after I actually started teaching at Carnegie Mellon, and I was very dubious about percussion ensemble because it was Paul Price in the 1950s.
Right.
Started at the University of Illinois, and I thought, oh, that doesn't really, that's not that, doesn't really that important.
Right.
So I kind of discounted it for quite a while, but then I got thinking differently, and so after I'd been teaching for a couple of years, I thought, well, maybe. Because I had only 3 students at Carnegie. It was Carnegie Tech in those days.
Right.
I had 3 students, and I thought, well, I should write them a little piece. So I wrote them a piece called 3 Spaces.
Okay.
They didn't realize that I was writing that sort of as looking at these 3 guys and thinking, oh, I had 3 spaces. 3 spaced out. Well, unfortunately, I was wrong. And one of them was Gene Wilmoth,
right.
who was not spaced out.
Right.
But he was the only one. Right. The other ones were like it was like pulling them along out of molasses to get them. So I wrote that, and then eventually I wrote a piece called Circus, which was for 5 people.
I remember it.
And that was my first real percussion ensemble, and that kind of got me interested in continuing this as a pedagogical thing.
Right.
And because there was hardly any percussion ensembles except the stuff that Paul Price had written or maybe somebody else at that time.
Right.
Most of which were beyond my students
okay.
at that time. So I thought, well, I'm right. I tried not to write down, but I tried to write up enough so that it would be like a pedagogical experience.
Right.
So that's how that all started. And then as I accumulated more students, I started writing bigger pieces.
Right.
But then I thought, I'll just write ensembles because I like to write the music.
Right. That
kind of thing.
Right.
So
your thought about percussion ensemble now is completely different than it was.
It's completely different than when years ago, 75 years ago.
Right. So do you find, obviously you find percussion ensemble to be kind of important?
I think it's a viable way to learn about creating music and also about the technical things that are involved.
Right.
It's immediate. I mean, in a percussion ensemble, it's immediate. So it's not like in an orchestra where you play one little thing and you sit there and you have to wait.
Right.
And think, maybe if I did this different or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your teaching appointments at Carnegie Mellon University, which was Carnegie Tech when you did it, and then Duquesne University, where we finally met in 1991.
Where we crossed paths
yes.
for the first time. Yeah, well, I began teaching at Carnegie Tech in 1958, and one of the biggest things there was I did not ever have a room to teach in.
Right.
I only had 3 students, but I didn't have any place to teach them. So I spent a lot of time rummaging around trying to find some room that we could call a percussion and some place where they could practice a little bit. So I finally discovered this room way down under the basement of the Fine Arts Building. But it also happened to be a room that was connected via an opening in the ceiling over here to the place where in the drama department they would clean their flats and the water would run down into this trough and then run off. And I immediately got on my high horse again. And actually, you know who Gary Olmsted is? He was my first graduate student, and he would come to drive down from Indiana where he was teaching, and we would have a lesson in that room.
Right.
So finally, what I started doing was covering everything up.
Right.
So it came in, it was covered with red or blue dust, and I could just take that off.
Right.
So they finally found another room, which again was in the basement, but this one actually had a window in it. And it was a fairly large room. I could actually have percussion ensemble and have most of the instruments that I needed for lessons, But then my students who were very Carnegie Mellon students were very creative, and then I came in one day and I found a big sofa in there. So I had to make all kinds of rules, which I'm sure were broken about using this room as an apartment.
Right.
No hot plates.
Right.
no,
no.
Nothing like that.
Right.
I had some really good students then. That was during the time when Tony Ames was there. This is the middle 60s.
Okay, right.
And he was there, and a bunch of other people. And so I continued teaching there until finally I just felt like every time I wanted to do something, there was somebody else that I was always like second in line.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of got tired of that.
Okay, right.
And so I taught at Carnegie Mellon for 10 or 15 years, something like that. And so I said, okay, I'll come and do percussion ensemble, but I don't want to teach because. So I did that for a while, and then I decided, okay, I don't need that at all. So I took a little hiatus. I actually had this long conversation with Al Abel about it once at that particular time frame, and from the 60s to the 70s, and he was teaching at Temple,
right?
And both of us were commiserated about, okay, we have all these students, all these kids. What are they going to do for a living?
Right.
How are they going to survive? I mean, what's the purpose of all this? So I had to do a lot of, internal meditation about that thought.
Right. Sure.
So I quit teaching in the university, but I still taught at home in my studio at home. And then about in the late 1980s, 88 or so, Michael Coomer, who was dean at Duquesne, and one of my former students,
right,
from Carnegie Mellon, and he said, "Well, we're going to lose Don Liuzzi, who was member of the Pittsburgh Symphony,
right,
but he was going to become the timpanist of the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Okay,
and we would like to have somebody, come, and would you be interested?" And so I said, "Yeah, okay." So I went. Actually, what I did, Jerry Unger was there before that, and he invited me to write a piece for them, as an ensemble. And so I guest conducted a piece that I wrote for them called March.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, and then I looked around and I thought, oh my gosh, they actually have a big studio with big windows and air,
right,
everything.
Yeah.
So that's when in 1989 I became part of the adjunct faculty,
right,
teaching timpani, and then also I took over the percussion ensemble then too. Jerry didn't want to mess with that.
Okay.
At that time, he was tired of that.
The cool thing about Duquesne, and when I came to study, with you, and I had never heard of a percussion ensemble before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I had gotten there, and I think I did my audition, and Jerry gave me a cassette tape of the percussion ensemble.
Yeah, we made a little deep demonstration thing.
And I thought, this is so cool. I've never heard of this before, and so we would always, it was Friday at 1, right? Friday at 1 o'clock we would have percussion ensemble, because we would always come after lunch. So at 1 to 3, and then orchestra was right after that. Yeah. But man, what a great experience that was for all of us. I mean, to have you up there conducting and just those wonderful experiences. And one of the great experiences was, you're one of the first people that actually challenged me to write something.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because I remember you came into the into the, it was either during a master class or a rehearsal or something. You were like, does anybody want to write anything for percussion ensemble? And I was the only sucker that raised my hand. And so I did, and we started working together. Yeah. And I think the first piece, one of the first pieces that I wrote was a piece called Not One Sparrow for flute and flute and vibraphone. And you actually helped me with that one. Yeah. So that was the first one that I actually tried to do. And now here I am, 30 years later.
Yeah. All kinds of stuff.
Doing this stuff now. But that was a big deal.
Composer now.
Trying my best. But thank you for that. That was a tremendous experience.
I was fortunate to have this cadre of really great students, for the last few years of my tenure there. So you were one of them. So.
Okay, so tell us, you've been retired now, over 20 years now.
27.
Yeah, so
That's unbelievable.
obviously you've been very busy composing,
Mm-hmm.
and you for a while you were the principal timpanist and composer for Vanderbilt Church here in Naples. And so what's retirement been like, and what are the things you're doing to keep yourself busy?
Well, that was always, Peggy and I have a plan of what we were going to do. So we, the two of us did have, in the last 20 years, have done lots of volunteer work here with Naples Botanical Garden and with another state agency that helps people with their medical insurance. It's called SHINE, Serving the Health Insurance Needs of the Elderly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we did that for about 10 years. And then at church, we were so fortunate to find Jim Cochran, who was the music director there.
Okay.
So because of him, that was like a little connection with the music here right away.
Okay.
And so over the years, that's been a wonderful. He's inspired me to write all these timpani parts to organ pieces where it fits. You know.
Right.
And also a whole pile of new pieces for organ, timpani, and trumpet. The principal player of the Naples Philharmonic, Matt Sonnenborn, is one of my dearest old friends.
Okay.
And so he's the one that always plays with
Okay.
us. And we even made a recording of a CD back in the day when CDs were viable.
They were hip. Yeah.
And so he's on that CD playing pieces with me. But that's been my major kind of active musical connection. I conducted the handbell on choir there for 20 years, or 18 years, and we had met some great people in that, and then also John Evans for about the first 10 years or so that we were here. He had an annual percussion concert called Percussion Summit that we played in the concert hall where the Philharmonic plays, and he always asked me to write a piece to open the show with.
Mm-hmm.
So every piece I ever wrote for that's been published.
Okay, right.
So that was another outlet. I mean, can you imagine having 14 great professional players playing your music?
Yeah.
It doesn't get any better than that.
No, I know.
So, and I have recordings of all those pieces too.
That's great. So what are you writing these days?
Well, I wrote some pieces for the Kansas City Youth Percussion Ensemble, and a piece for a little quartet in Japan, and I've written some music now. None of these have been. I haven't heard any of these pieces played by their ensembles yet. A piece for Pedro Sa down in Rio de Janeiro, and I'd like to write another piece for your group sometime.
Yeah, we're anxious to do it. So let us know when you need to do it.
Yeah, so I'm working on a piece now for one of your former students,
Gustavo.
Gustavo Miranda, who teaches at Nicholls State University in Louisiana. So I'm really excited about doing that one for him. So
I'd like to thank you for everything you've done for me for my entire career. I mean, you've been such a great mentor to me and my colleagues at Duquesne, and getting me to write things. You're the first person that said, "Hey, write," and so I really wanted to. Well, Stan Leonard, right? So I need to write too. So I that's how I sort of got into all this, and just. What a great teacher you were, and just such a and thank you for taking me places. You took me one time to Kansas City to play your piece, Voices of Peace, and you took Tempest Fugia to Passaic one time, and you've just been such a great teacher, mentor, and my friend. Yeah. And I would like to thank you so much for everything you've done for me personally, but not just for me, for the percussion community in general.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm glad that we're still friends.
Oh yeah,
I hope we can be friends for a lot longer still.
We will. But thank you for letting me come and for sitting down and doing this for the future generations. They will appreciate it, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that, and thank you very much too for being interested in doing that.
All right.
So.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.